welcome back to my channel. Bonsoir et re-bienvenue sur ma chaîne. My name is Muriel and this evening I'm going back to my good old reliables. I think to do a book review for the Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. After all these trailer reactions and a movie review, it feels comfortable to come back to a book review. And a classic, too. Not SFF, because sometimes I like to change it up a bit. So, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is one of... Okay, I was about to say something massively stupid. I don't know how many novels Anne Bronte wrote. I know she wrote Anya's Grey, and I know she wrote this. Did she write anything else? I have not checked this out, so I'm not the source of information for this clearly. But I have had prior experience, is what I wanted to say, with the Bronte sisters' literary works. I have read Jane Eyre by Emily Bronte, I think, and Wuthering Heights by Charlotte Bronte. If I mix those two up, apologies, I just tend to do that. For some reason, I just can never exactly remember which sister wrote which novel. So I basically wanted to read something by the third Bronte sisters so I could, have read something by each of the Brontes. So it's not at all a complete exploration of the Brontes' literary works, but at least I read one of each sister. I can already say that it was a good book. It was a decently enjoyable read. I started out really liking what I was reading, but unfortunately as the story progressed, as the character development unfolded, I became increasingly disappointed with it, unfortunately. So I already thought this was going to be at least a 7 out of 10, but it wasn't. I'll give my final rating at the end of the review, as I usually do. So, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall tells the story of the moving in of this somewhat mysterious female figure called Mrs. Helen Graham to... actually don't get the name of the village until like the end of the book, so it doesn't really matter, but to this little rural community in England, of course. And you have this main male character, he's narrating at the beginning of the story, called Gilbert Markham, and he's fairly intrigued by this new tenant at Wildfell Hall and progressively gets closer to her. And then there are lots of rumors floating around this Mrs. Helen Graham, very negative rumors, that are prejudiced against her. You have to remember this takes place during the 19th century, smack dab in the middle of the Victorian era in England. So some people are saying that she cheated on her husband, that she's a woman of loose morals, basically. But Gilbert Markham becomes her friend, and basically something happens to make him start to believe those very negative rumors. But then since Helen herself has become attached to Mr. Markham, to Gilbert, she wants to set the record straight, basically, and so she gives him part of her diary. And that actually tells you her backstory without going into too many details because I want to keep this review fairly spoiler-free. It tells of her first marriage, which was fairly abusive, to a man who, he was genuinely of loose morals and also a very just dark-souled person, is how I'm going to put it, with problems to do with alcoholism and, vice, etc. And so it tells her backstory before getting back to the present with Gilbert Markham. The way the story is told is a bit weird because, it starts with Mr. Markham writing this story to a friend in a letter, and then the second big chunk of the story where Mrs. Helen Graham is the MC is told through extracts from one of her diaries, which she gives to Gilbert Markham. So it's in the present, then in the past, and then back to the present. So, like I just said, the structure of this novel was a bit wonky to me. It wasn't that big of a deal either. It was just a bit clumsy overall. It's, again, kind of a story within a story, which is fine because, it's one big chunk in the present. A chunk divided into at the beginning and the end, and then this big middle chunk, which, stays focused on the story of Mrs. Helen Graham. So, it's fine. It's a bit wonky, but not to an egregious degree either, I guess. The chapters were actually, on average, fairly short, which that's a plus in my book. And the pacing was slow to medium. There were slower parts, but that's kind of the nature of these kinds of stories too. It's a very character focused and character-driven story, all about internal feelings and relationships and thinking about morals and those kinds of considerations. So that's just the nature of the beast in a way. So slow to medium paced is how I would put it, though I was never bored. I was always kept engaged to some degree. I really wanted to see what was going to happen. I really wanted to discover Mrs. Helen Graham's backstory. So I read this, if not fairly quickly as such, fairly smoothly. And so that brings me to the prose. The prose itself was fairly elegant, pretty, I guess, more than beautiful as such once again, though there were beautiful passages because, I mean, it loosely falls into romantic literature. I don't think it's officially classified as romantic literature, unlike perhaps something like Wuthering Heights or even Jane Eyre. But I mean, yeah, the descriptions of nature and rural life and, attuning your feelings to nature around you, those are very, to my mind in any case, romantic things, but I don't know that it's specifically an example of romantic literature like Frankenstein is, for example. So, make of that what you will. As such, though, at times I did find the prose to be a wee bit over dramatic, but again, it's kind of a function of the time period of the kind of story. It is kind of a romance as well. Well, partly in any case. And just, that period of just refined sentiments, perhaps too refined given Victorian social mores. So at times it was just a bit too overdramatic for my personal taste for one thing, and perhaps more generally for more contemporary tastes. Maybe. And this was specifically more apparent when it came to, the romance, the interactions between the characters who become love interests, and there's a lot of dilly-dallying around their true feelings and expressing their feelings, or not even dilly-dallying, but just being very precious and hyperbolic about their feelings and how their morals tie into their feelings, which I guess it didn't really bother me to the same extent in Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights, but then again, those two books probably deserve a reread, but not the subject for another day. And so, as stated before, this is definitely a character-driven, a character-focused story. It is, in a way, a bit of a character study of the main female character, Mrs. Helen Graham. To a lesser extent, it's also a bit of a character study of one of the main male characters, or at least the male narrator you get in this book, Gilbert Markham, though you also get a fairly well-fleshed-out character analysis of Mrs. Helen Graham's first husband, Mr. Arthur Huntingdon, who's an alcoholic and fairly abusive at times. At least emotionally and morally abusive towards his wife, and is just a man of loose morals, indulging in all sorts of vice, but specifically the vice of alcohol. So this is a novel about character, about exploring characters' inner life, their psyches, their emotional turmoils, their moral conflicts, and also the relationships between characters, and the flourishing of human emotion and sentiments, and the complicated pathways those can take, especially given the historical context. I really want to stress that, because it kind of gets annoying at times. It got annoying at times for me, and it's a bit disappointing because actually I started out really liking the character of Mrs. Helen Graham. In the very beginning, she's described as someone who keeps away from the rest of the village or the town. She keeps to herself a lot. She has a son as well, so she's very close to her son, who's about 6 or 7 years old. She's a painter. She sustains herself by her own means. She makes money on her own, which for the time was actually relatively unusual. For that socioeconomic class in any case. She has a very rich inner intellectual life. She reads a lot, she thinks a lot about things, she has these deep philosophical and moral, even religious conversations with Mr. Gilbert Markham, and I found her at times to be even socially anxious, I don't know, but she seemed in any case very introverted, and she didn't fit in with the rest of village society and all the gossiping that goes on in the background, and she didn't like any of that, and had very harsh judgments on the more flighty and superficial official characters of the village in which she resides when she's a tenant at Wildfell Hall. So I really identified with that a bit. I was like, oh, here's a character I can really relate to. But then that kind of progressively went away as I discovered her backstory, how you discover she was as a younger woman looking for a husband because, you know, that's just what women were for at the time. I started enjoying her less because she appeared a bit different to the initial impression I had of her. And then a lot of religious preachiness and moralizing comes in. This character is very religious, and she talks a lot about religious morals and her relationship with God and how she conceptualizes being a good Christian. And that got really tedious for me. Like, my tolerance for, no offense to anyone who's religious, but for what I perceive to be religious BS, especially of the Abrahamic kind, my tolerance has just gone like this with the years and with, sadly, the excesses of extremist currents of religion. And I'm just not about that in my literature. I'm like, no, just stop. I can't with this. Now, again, fine. It's Victorian era England, and as I understand it, the Bronte sisters were raised by a pastor or a vicar or something like that, and Anne Bronte herself was a fairly religious woman and thought a lot about religious philosophy and theology and things like that. So, I mean, fair enough, to each their own, but it was just not my cup of tea. That got on my nerves fairly quickly, and I was like, just please stop, because then that gets mixed in with the development of character relationships and how she conceptualizes romance, I guess, and being involved with a man, with a person who could become her husband. And I was like, ugh. I was tired of it. But I tried to remain understanding given the socio-historical context, given the bit of background information I obtained about the author, especially in the essay at the back. You always get an essay at the back of these editions, as an FYI. So, I mean, it helped, but not quite enough. And then, I mean, that's just concordant with that. It's just the constraints placed upon people, especially men and women relating with one another under Victorian social mores. It's just pretty bad. It's bad, it's tedious. Now, as an individual, I already have a hard time with, like, romantic love, romance, defining that stuff. So add that to super constricting gender roles and heteronormative assignations of Victorian era Europe, and it was like, oh, kill me now. Because, like I said in the part about writing, there's just so much suppressing of emotions. There's so much dilly-dallying about just being freaking honest with one another. And now, the ironic thing is I, myself, kind of suck at clear communication in relationships. Or, I mean, that has been my experience thus far. But I don't want to see it in my fictional characters, is kind of my point. It's like, so many times I was shouting internally, or sometimes externally, just freaking talk to one another. Just say what you mean, say what you think, say what you feel. Stop beating around the bush for F's sake. And like, it's not just when characters are speaking to one another, it's when they write to one another. Like, I have social anxiety. I suck ass at communicating clearly, assertively in like one-on-one contexts and relationships. But when I write, writing is a lot more easier than talking to other people for me. But here, even in the letter exchanges, there's so much that's left unsaid. And it's like, no, but I cannot say it that way because you've offended my feelings, and thus I won't reward you with me being honest with you. And it's just so much of that shit. And I was like, no, please stop. I'm tired. Like, stop. Just talk to one another. Again, I acknowledge that this is just a massive function of the time period during which this was written, but still, I didn't like it. I didn't like it as a contemporary reader. I didn't like it as the person that I am. That being said, I sounded very harsh there, but there is good character development. You follow characters for years of their lives and you see the evolution, that progression in their conceptualization of some things, especially relationships between men and women, and then more specifically relationships between a husband and wife. And I mean, I'm going to get to this in a second. There are actually proto-feminist elements in this as well, which to me clashed a wee bit with like the religious moralizing. So that made for an interesting contrast. I don't want to praise that. There is good character development. It is a study of character, and in that respect, it was well done and realized. But given the limitations of the social and cultural context and the time period during which this was written, it was very often quite frustrating and annoying, unfortunately. And so finally, I'm going to touch upon some of the themes I picked up in this novel. To me, this, I guess, is an example of proto-feminist literature because there are a few elements which speak to the emancipation of women attaining a freer position in society. By that I mean, for example, Mrs. Helen Graham, after a certain period of her life, basically leaves her marriage. I mean, she can't get a divorce, given the time period, given the laws at that time, but she leaves her husband, goes off to live on her own with her son, to raise him on her own, and she makes a living out of selling her paintings. That was pretty daring for women in that time period, or at least women of her socio-economic classes. I'm aware that there were differences for like working class women, of course, but that was just not done. It was most definitely frowned upon, and you could be considered a woman of loose morals and just like, what the hell, you're supposed to be attached to your husband and stay in his household, take care of his children, his needs, etc., etc. That in a way is proto-feminist in that sense. There's also a few lines dropped here and there about the necessity of educating boys and girls in a more equal fashion. There were actually quite thoughtful passages pointing to the fact that boys are taught to expect the vicissitudes of life and toughen themselves up, whereas girls are just expected to be pretty, subservient, and find a good husband. And to be fair, I mean, discussions about gender-free child rearing and education are still very much relevant today, which is kind of sad in a way, because that means it's still necessary. But so you already see seeds of that here. Mrs. Helen Graham argues that little girls and little boys should be raised in a similar fashion, should be given the same moral values, should be encouraged to nurture the same positive human traits. So it's kind of, a proto-railing against gender in a way. I thought that was an interesting part of the book, and I appreciate the fact that that was in there. And also, this is more a cheeky little remark, I guess, but this book is kind of a remark upon the fact that men don't know how to take no for an answer. Don't get me wrong, this is not a book that hates on men by any means. I mean, there's a romance, there's a heterosexual romance in this book, basically. There isn't ever a moment when the female character says all men are trash or anything like that. But she just encounters a lot of male characters which are very badly behaved, even abusive, who don't give a crap about the feelings of their spouses, don't give any consideration to what they're being put through. And there are just so many men who propose to her, even when she's married, because they see that her husband is crap. And so they're like, look, your husband treats you like shit, so might as well get with me. And even like when she's 17, 18, 19 years old, because yes, you were supposed to be married off by that age. There are men who proposition her, and sure, they're rich, they come from good families, but they're so freaking condescending to her, treat her almost like a child, which is borderline kind of creepy as well. A lot of those men are significantly older than she is, and there's, again, this kind of creepy pseudo-paternal vibe to them as well. And it's like, you're talking to a woman you intend on marrying and presumably having sex with like she's your daughter. What is up with that? So yeah, and they just will not listen to the fact that she is not interested, and she will not marry them. And she's lucky enough to be basically the adopted daughter of her aunt and uncle, and they will not force her to marry anyone she doesn't like, but they still kind of nudge her in certain directions. She's like, no, I'm not interested in this man, his personality is abhorrent to me, our values don't match up, I am not interested, I will not marry this person. And yet this man still comes to her house and says, but I will make a good husband for you, I will tame your rebellious excesses, but still nurture you and love you, and they just cannot take no for an answer. Which I found kind of funny, given that this is still kind of a relevant topic today within like feminist discussion. So that was interesting. Again, proto-feminist in that respect. Now, because of the story, because of the relationship that Ms. Helen Graham has within the story itself with her first husband as she's telling her life story, I definitely think, I don't know if it's so much a discussion, but there's exposing of the horrors of addiction and alcoholism and also abusive relationships. Now, from what I learned from the essay at the back, the Bronte sisters had a brother. This brother fell into deep depression and alcoholism and I think died from his alcoholism, so it's pretty sad. So this had a direct influence apparently on this story, and people at the time were horribly shocked that someone was talking about these disgusting immoral things such as addiction, alcoholism, abusive spousal relationships. But Anne Bronte was like, this is real, this happens, and you should be able to talk about it and write about it, because one of the points of art is to tell the truth. etc., etc. And yeah, I mean, you see the horrors of alcoholism, what it does to your body, what it does to your spirit, what it does to the way you interact with the people around you. And I mean, Mrs. Helen Graham's first husband, Arthur Huntingdon, isn't really a nice man to begin with, though she contends, at least at the beginning, that he had a core of goodness that was just being led astray by his acquaintances, his friends, and just alluring siren song of vice and debauchery. And yeah, he falls into alcoholism and is very psychologically, morally abusive at times towards her. Now, personally, you might think this is going to be a weird complaint. At times, I felt that there should have been physical abuse. I'm not saying I needed explicit descriptions of wife beating. That is not at all what I mean. But it's just that one of the friends of this Arthur Huntingdon, who marries Helen's best friend, at one point he kind of loses it because he's drunk out of his mind and throws shit around, throws a chair, and just becomes fairly aggressive, physically aggressive, grabs his wife's arm and hurts her. And I was like, when they're at home alone, he beats her, right? Like, am I reading this wrong? To me, it was fairly obvious that that was an implicit reference to the fact that that individual male character was physically abusive towards his wife. But then it's never really alluded to again, it's never confirmed on the page. And to be honest, like, even Arthur Huntington's behavior at times, well, didn't feel quite abusive enough. Don't get me wrong, you can be emotionally, psychologically abusive without it ever escalating into physical violence. I have been myself in at times, in any case, emotionally abusive relationship that did not, thankfully, involve any kind of physical or sexual violence. So I know this is a thing. It's just that even the moral, psychological violence, emotional violence, or abuse is what I mean, didn't feel quite significant enough given the character portrayal you're given of this Arthur Huntingdon, given his descent into addiction and alcoholism, given the fact he basically hates his wife, has no respect for her whatsoever, so there was a bit of dissonance there. I don't know how to put it any other way. It just felt a bit dissonant to me, like she was Anne Bronte perhaps reining herself in because, once again, Victorian era Europe, and there are just certain things you couldn't write about at that time. And she was already taking somewhat of a risk writing about the things she does write about in the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and those violent emotions and those excesses of vice and debauchery, etc., etc. So perhaps that's as far as she could go, not only given Victorian social mores, but given her own levels of comfort, maybe. Maybe I'm reading way too much into this as well. But that was just, my feeling about this. And finally, I guess I can point to the thematic motif of redemption, trying to redeem people you love and care about, trying to redeem yourself in your own eyes, because Helen as a character oftentimes feels pretty crappy about herself. She questions her moral integrity. She really tries to believe that there's goodness in her first husband, that he is redeemable, that he is salvageable, that she can elevate him out of vice and sin and seek the glory of God. I mean, that's where the religious preachiness comes in, which I didn't really like, but fine. Ironically, and this is something that has been critiqued since then by feminist thinkers, this impulse of women to take care of everyone else around them but themselves, and just, be nurturers and caretakers, and kind of forgetting to take care of themselves as well. So that was an interesting journey for this character. It was an interesting exploration of that theme, redemption, but also perhaps learning to let go of that project at times, or I mean forever, because sometimes it's just not achievable, and tied into that redemption of oneself, because Helen is judged pretty harshly by the people around her when she lives at Wildfell Hall, and I guess there's a bit of a critique going on about, judging a person very superficially, judging a person on hearsay, on appearance, on appearances, social appearances, without actually knowing the person, so making very unfair and superficial judgments without actually taking the true value of the person into account, because you just never give them a chance, really. Never try to learn their story, their struggles, and try to understand them. Overall, like I said, I enjoyed this. It was a decently good read, a decently enjoyable classic. Definitely not my favorite classic, probably not even my favorite of what I've read by the Bronte sisters, but still I'm happy I read it. I certainly don't regret taking the time to read this. I think I rated this at a 6.5 out of 10. I guess you could average it out to 7. Okay, no, it's a 6.5 out of 10. I'm gonna stand by that rating, but that's not bad by any means. I enjoyed the proto-feminist elements present in this novel. I mean, what I perceive to be proto-feminist elements in any case. I was moved by the depictions of alcoholism, the ravages it does to the individual, to the people around said individual, just the degradation of a person, the fall of a person into vice and self-destruction, primarily because my loosely defined ex is an alcoholic, and that was, well, I mean, it still is for him, obviously horrible. It's a person with whom I could not continue having a relationship in large parts because of alcoholism and emotional abuse that was largely tied into that. So in that respect, actually made me very sad at times. This book elicited a crap ton of melancholia out of me. I also just found it melancholic and a bit sad just because I was very moved by the romantic descriptions of nature, real life, you know, the attunement of emotions with nature. But it's not melancholic in a negative sense. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone who hasn't experienced mental illness and those states of feeling and being. Melancholia isn't always necessarily entirely negative. If you haven't experienced this, I cannot explain it. You'll understand if you've experienced it yourself, basically. It's one of those things. So yeah, strong levels of melancholia just came off this book and went straight into my heart. But it wasn't always outright negative. It was also negative at times because it made me sad and reminded me of things I personally experienced. But then, again, like I said, I was also very disappointed by the annoying amounts of religious moralizing and preachiness and just the overwhelming fact that this is a Victorian era novel. And then the romance aspect, I'm not about traditional heteronormative romantic love and romance, but that's an entirely me thing. Once again, the vast majority of people will relate to this kind of thing. In my specific case, that just never really works for me, especially under the very restrictive limitations of like Victorian era social mores. And one little thing I want to note though that I found interesting is to see how much of that still exists today. Like a lot of, again, as I perceive them, social conventions around romantic love, relationships between men and women, sexual relationships more specifically, obviously, a lot of that can definitely trace its roots back to the 19th century. Like this whole thing of being very aloof between men and women, and you can't show physical affection outside of like family members. If you're a man, basically, this is actually one of the sad things about gender for men, is that if you're a man, you can't really be physically affectionate without it being read as sexual, and I think that's terribly sad. I think you should be able to hug a female friend or hold their hands without it being read as, oh my god, they're in love, they're so cute. Like, no, why can you just be cuddly with your platonic friends? And same thing goes for like male-male relationships. Two dudes who are purely platonic friends should be able to hug one another, even to hold hands. And you know what, I'm gonna say it, they should be able to cuddle. And I mean, if it's a bit too dodgy for adult men, at least little boys should be able to snuggle together and watch a movie and just be buddies without it being read as automatically gay. Nothing wrong if you are gay and you're with your boyfriend, but I think this should also be accessible to just two heterosexual male best friends. Physical affection isn't automatically sexual. It's fine if it's sexual as well. It's a spectrum of physical intimacy, basically, but like the non-sexual physical intimacy should be perfectly acceptable between entirely platonic friends of whatever sex. That was my little hot take of the day. Make of that what you will. And that concludes my review for The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. Not my favorite classic, not my favorite Bronte novel, but still an enjoyable read. Would I recommend it? Maybe, you know, if you like that kind of story, if you want to explore classic English language literature, you could do worse than pick this one up. I certainly preferred it to The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, but more about that in my monthly reading wrap-up. In the meantime, I hope you will have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. Take good care of yourselves, and I shall see you fairly soon in the next video. Bye bye.